This is Hello Brain, presented by Brainovation Network. Welcome back to Hello Brain. I'm Colin Adams, and we've got the whole crew here today. We've got Dr. Laura Davis, Dr. Ramona von Lieden, and Dr. Dan O'Brien. Today's episode is called Hello Artificial Intelligence, and I actually didn't know this. I'm not sure if you guys did. I might have just been living under a rock this whole time, but AI actually originated all the way back in 1943 was when it officially started with two guys named Walter and Warren, who developed the first artificial neuron, which I was super fascinated by because in 1943, I'm thinking like we're just getting started with like television, we're just getting started with things like radio, and all of a sudden we've got these two guys that are like light years ahead of everyone else, and then whatever happened to that. And so I started to kind of dig, and it looks like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was just this complete pause on the development of AI, which maybe Dan, you can speak to, but really found that interesting. And then as of 2022, ChatGPT, which we all know, launched, which seemingly ended humanity's capacity for developing original thought. We go on social media, especially like LinkedIn is where I see this the most. I think you get someone making a post and you're thinking like, man, this person's brilliant. Wow. Like they know how to word things well. They're big on the not this, but this, not this, but this kind of structure of how they're typing something. And then you start hitting those emojis and those sneaky little dashes that get included, and you're like, oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. That wasn't your thought at all, actually. So, um, yeah, a lot of interesting developments with AI since, and we're going to kind of tie this conversation in with the last one we had about neuroplasticity. And, you know, before I go on another huge rant about AI or how people are using it, there are actually several ways that people are using it that are very healthy. So outsourcing small tasks is one of them, like menial tasks like emails, setting up your day, planning out your meals, planning a trip even can all be super helpful. So I'm wondering with all of you, if your brain could outsource one annoying or frustrating or like menial task forever, which task would you choose?
Yeah, no, great question, Todd. I think as far as, with my role in healthcare with AI, you make a really good point. The fact that what's really meaningful to me during the day is when I'm looking at labs, right? I'm always looking for a needle in a haystack. And the fact with AI, if it can pick up on pattern recognition, I can really pick up on, okay, someone's labs are kind of off based on AI. I don't think it's going to replace humans, but the fact that there would be no mistake in lab values. And again, being able to pick up on disease and diagnosis with labs is really crucial. That's number one. And also, number two is with radiology, when we talk about imaging and brain health, the fact that, most radiologists right now are utilizing AI, probably a half to about two-thirds are utilizing AI just to make sure that we know on the imaging, on the radiology side, it makes a lot of sense and it's matching up the diagnosis. So I think when we look at pattern recognition, the fact of AI to improve healthcare outcomes, which is really where we're headed, especially in brain health and even overall healthcare, right? We look at quality of care, we look at cost, we look at access, but now we're looking at improving outcomes. And the fact that AI can improve healthcare outcomes, from my perspective, from a healthcare clinician, physician perspective, it's very important.
What about you, Laura?
You know, my day-to-day right now, work-wise, is not a lot of mundane stuff, and it's all like human connection. So I don't think that right now what I'm doing would I like if I had to choose anything in life, it would not be work related. It would be sweeping my three dogs' hair off the ground, which I do know there are robotic like things that do that, but they don't really pick because I have one, but like it doesn't do it right. So I need like a AI dog hair sweeper is really the only mundane task that I need to get rid of right now. Um, I guess in previous, work, there are some emails that could probably be answered by AI, but at the same time, like, we have AI little chat people at the clinic, and they don't I still get those questions because they don't answer the question. So
Yeah.
you'll probably hear in the rest of this episode, I'm just like not a big, I don't use AI. So that's my honest answer.
Yeah, although I think right now it's the reality is even if we don't think we use AI, we do, right? Because everything has some component of AI built into it if we're doing any kind of online anything or system. But Laura, I feel that so deeply. If you had like, and I actually, Colin, when you were talking about the early ages of AI, it made me immediately think of like the Jetsons and like the like robot maid, right? Because the robot maid was AI, like it had enough sentience to be able to like anticipate the needs of the Jetsons, right? Like that has always been the goal. It's like, do you have that home robot who can take care of all those mundane tasks, who can clean, who can do all these things that you don't want to do that kind of take up time in your day? I mean, yeah, if I could have an AI, robot actually mow my lawn, because as we head into spring, I mean, I have a huge lawn. It takes me an hour and a half to 2 hours, and I got to do it every week to a week and a half. Yeah, that's huge. But with how it's being used now, and I think that's kind of speaking to it, the way the AI has started to creep in. Your comment about LinkedIn is so real. Is that I don't think we really understand how to use AI to its best purpose yet, and I think that's a beautiful example of how we are trying it. Right? People are like, oh, we can summarize things for me. It can do these things, but then you're just the people are just copying and pasting it, and so now we've seen that. Now we all recognize the pattern where it's like, oh yeah, you wrote that with AI. Like we know that it was written with AI. I think where it can be really useful, and for myself, like I wrote this down as a note for myself, was like, I wish it could do my overthinking for me. Right? It's like I've written something and I'm like, oh my god, is that okay to send, is it right? And I do sometimes put it in there, but I think AI, obviously, it's mimicking back to you what you want it to kind of state, so it's hard for you to really like get good critical feedback. But for myself in my day to day, honestly, organizing meetings is so challenging, right? By everyone's schedules, and we have tools like Calendly and we have the other things. But if I could have like AI just figure out when these meetings needed to happen, that would be so helpful. That would be like game changing. I do know, I think one thing that's really interesting is my friends who are teachers, if you get into the kind of the work world, where they're seeing it being really useful, just like you, Dr. Dan, these mundane things. Like a friend of mine is building AI for his high school to do it for Scantrons, right? Like, so they don't have to sit there and grade things. And even though they had those Scantrons where you would plug it in, but then you still have to take all that data and like put it into your systems. And so they can spend more time on things like curriculum planning rather than tallying up scores. And I think that's where AI becomes like actually very beneficial and saves a ton of time in a meaningful way.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And what about on the flip side too? Just looking at the youth, you make a great point as far as the education. What about a lot of the kids that are utilizing AI in class, but maybe are not really understanding, right? When you look at, they're getting through their homework on AI, but then when it comes time for test time, they're not really understanding. So there may be a potential gap in that. Looking at, of course, we use AI all the time. I use it again when I'm looking at labs with radiology, but I think that for the youth, we have to be really careful in the fact that they're just plugging in, they're finishing their homework. And then when it comes to standardized test and different test taking strategies, do they really understand that material? And I think we talk about neuroplasticity, we talk about those connections, right? How do we build more of those synapses, right? How do we expand the synapses to have our processing even better? That's really intriguing. And I think that AI, there may be a potential gap with that, with teaching, some of the youth, the fact they're always on their phone, they're utilizing AI, but are they really understanding the material to really grow those synaptic neurons?
Yeah, 100%. Dr. Dan, I was at a party this weekend, and this actually came up in the context of like, because our response is always now, if somebody's like, oh, I wonder if X, Y, and Z, you're like, oh, you Google it, right? You immediately reach for your phone and like see if that question answered. Like we all do it. We don't even think about it sometimes. And I can't remember what the question was, but somebody asked a question and it was like, oh, I'm sure we could find out if that exists on Google. And then I was like, no, let's not do that. Let's take the time and actually like brainstorm on what this would look like if it didn't exist, which is that gap in education, right? Is that need to kind of like follow the linear line of like how do you create something. And if you have an AI or sort of, I mean, Google at this point is AI as well. If you're searching on Google, it doing that work for you, then you've lost that kind of understanding the steps for how to get somewhere.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it could replace a lot of the traditional ways that we learn, which is really fascinating. Still the future, though. Ramona, do you think it's going to replace? Now, there's always a big topic, right, in healthcare. Is it going to replace workers? I know in my field, probably your fields as well. Is there a sense that AI is going to replace? I know some of the work you do in medical affairs. Could you answer really specific data questions through AI without really having a human interaction with key opinion leaders out there?
Yeah, I
If they
wonder,
could just plug it into AI.
yeah, I think Dr. Dan and I'm going to guess that you may feel similarly to me on this, is that at this point, I do think there's it can be helpful for like taking a lot of data and starting to look at patterns, looking at trends. But the reality is it can't interpret them to a critical enough degree that like if I have AI take, I'll sometimes plug it like a data sheet into AI and be like, hey, give me the trends. And then I have to look through it to find all those interesting pieces. And I'm sure in the same place, if you're in the hospital, yes, it can help like identify things in a radiology report, et cetera, but ultimately it's going to miss stuff like AI because it doesn't have that component of actual like, and I mean, it's artificial intelligence, but it doesn't have that true intelligence component. There's always pieces that it can't quite comprehend and it can't quite miss, where maybe it's good at a first draft, sure, but you need that extra piece to come back in and kind of scan it and make sure that you're hitting all the relevant points.
Exactly. And I think in healthcare, when we look at, take a surgeon, for example, having that tactile feedback, that AI can't really have, right? We're talking about a lot about right now, as far as on the robotics side, robotics with analytics, with data, but still the surgeon needs to have that tactile feedback, right? Hands in the cavity, be able to understand, be able to kind of feel around without just kind of, AI relying on it. So it really is fascinating from kind of both perspectives.
Yeah, I would ask you too. I feel like you see this in like medical shows, right? Where it's like, I mean, even as a student, right? You read things and you have like, oh, okay, this presents as X, Y, and Z if you see it in the clinic. But then over time and over experience of seeing patients, you know that even though that's the typical presentation, that sometimes a different symptom presents, and that sometimes these weird unassociated symptoms are actually a sign that something is going on. AI doesn't know that, right? AI can't process that because it's looking for all of its information from the internet. It's not really going to be able to take into account those pieces that like a physician knows over time from experience.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's that physician patient relationship. We learned that in medical school, the fact that just hearing their story, building that trust with the patient to be able to interact is something that maybe AI can't teach.
Yeah,
And Laura, you may have
AI,
experiences like that too.
yeah.
I mean, based on the fact that, your experience and your work with patients, what that looks like, that patient interaction,
Yeah,
clinician
I
patient
don't think
interaction.
that, there are some tools you can use in the PT world to digitally measure stuff, but there's not ever going to be a time like half the work I do is with my hands, so that's not going to be done by AI ever. Well, I
Yeah,
say ever, definitely.
AI is, yeah, it doesn't have
Like,
any
and like I
nuance.
talked about a couple, maybe on our first episode, when the patient who couldn't stand and then we talked for an hour and she stood, like that's not happening without that human connection. So
And that's something that's going to become even
job
more
security.
valuable over time is that connection. People are going to start to really crave that human to human valuable connection. And
One thing on that real quick, like this, and maybe this is somewhere else in this episode, but like I have contact lenses and 1-800 contacts, when you call them, a human answers the phone in one ring, no matter what time of day you call them. And like I hate ordering things like just whatever. And I know it's going to be expensive, but when she answers the phone after like she or he after one ring, like there is something about someone answering a phone. You don't even have to press one. Like immediately a human answers the phone. It's the only company I know of that still does that. And like that is irreplaceable. Like just to hear a human voice on the other end of the phone without a recording is like makes them my favorite company in all of the world.
Do you ever get tricked, Laura? It's like you think you're talking to a human, but
No,
you're
it's a
not.
hundred percent always a real person. I'll call them at like 5 a.m. and a real person answers the phone. I mean, every single time. This has been going on for years. And every time I think this is the time I'm going to call 1-800 contacts and a real person isn't going to answer the phone. And last time when I ordered them a few weeks ago, I like told her how thankful I was that they still answer the phone every time. And I said, don't ever change. So
Yeah, I do. I
love
feel
this.
like that. There's definitely, I mean, we had it first, right? The automated voice systems where you call in and you're like, I just want to talk to somebody. It's going to take me 30 seconds if I can just get on the phone with someone. And now it's gone even one step further where now it's like, oh, it's not just automated, but it's AI. And you're like, okay, just give me a representative. Like my question's going to get answered so much faster if I can just talk to a person.
And then you're
There,
screaming, well, I'm screaming in the phone, I want to talk to someone.
yes, it's like you
Yeah.
just sit there. I end up with like a lot of
Representative.
yeah, representative.
Laura, is that
Zero.
where your Philly accent comes into place? Is that where your Philly accent
Oh,
comes
I
into
go
place?
so Philly on the yeah.
That's hilarious. And
I guess the one thing I do use AI for, which to talk to my Philly. So I have in ChatGPT asked him whoever to make my email a little less Philly. So um like to help filter me because I know that
A little more
I can
Midwest,
be a little
right?
more blunt. Yeah, a little more Kansas City. So yeah, I have used it for that to make it a little softer, but not
that's
all the way.
that's
Yeah.
brilliant. Like that's a great way to use it, whether it's organizing or restructuring something. Dan, I'm curious, could you, before we really dive into the this thought of how the development of AI and how AI is beginning to consume society is impacting things like neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to lengthen those synapses and develop connections that are really meaningful in terms of learning skills and things like that. Can you just give a quick um, brief synapse of what artificial intelligence is?
Yeah, no, Colin, great. I mean, it's really the fact that I think through that the machine learning through pattern recognition, again, especially in my field, being able to pick on patterns, being able to really find ways to, improve outcomes. The fact that the data comes together and there's a huge amount of pattern recognition to be able to produce, a better outcome, especially in healthcare, but really just kind of this conglomerate of data that comes together that runs through different algorithms to be able to kind of spit something out is, what I use a lot with AI with healthcare. It's doing all that, especially like I mentioned that first example of the labs, right? We're checking someone's calcium, potassium, magnesium, whatever it may be. I'm always looking for abnormal values. And the fact that AI can pick up on that recognition is really important, really, really in healthcare. But, that again, there's many forums and I'm sure, Laura and Ramona probably have different, thoughts on AI too, but there's many different forums and just the way, again, the future is headed with it. I find it really exciting. I think that it's here. It's not going anywhere. It's just the fact that with the youth, we have to make sure that, through those kind of primary years that they're really understanding the material and they're building that processing and that learning, to your point, Colin, those synapses really well.
Yeah, and you said pattern recognition is a very key phrase that's continued to come up even in this conversation. And I think about developing skills through elementary school and middle school and high school, and whether it was my education or sports or socially, a lot of those things are your brain picking up on patterns and then being able to recognize them in different settings. And because you've done that time and time again, your brain has created that system so that you know how to respond in a certain situation, or you know how to, for whatever reason, work through Pythagorean theorem, or you know how to throw a soft changeup when you just went hard in on a fastball to a power hitter in the middle of an order, to give a baseball reference. So instead of thinking about how AI thinks like a brain, I'm curious to hear all of your opinions on this a little bit more interesting question. What do you believe, both good and bad potentially, is AI doing to our brains? And so, Dan, we know that AI systems and agents are constantly being developed and trained in a lot of good ways. Like I can imagine as a physician to be able to have an AI system or agent that can do your notes for you in a patient interaction, that probably saves you tons of time. But how would you say that AI is also training us?
Yeah, really, Colin. I think on the flip side, just to answer your first question, maybe we talked about the positives, but maybe some of the negatives would be like a misdiagnosis. The wrong data is being inputted to be able to produce a misdiagnosis based on me maybe not having the right information to be able to put in. And that's where Ramona made a really good point with that physician-patient relationship. For them to open up about their story, to build that trust, and Laura, you probably see it in your PT clinics too, is really crucial. Because if you put in misinformation, you're going to have misinformation coming back out, misdiagnosis, mistreatment, a sequela then of healthcare events. So it's really important to have the right data inputted to make sure now we're getting an accurate diagnosis. Because really, AI is supposed to augment, it's supposed to make more effective clinical decision. And we have to make sure that we really keep on track with that.
Dr. Dan, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think, because I wonder, and then Laura, you as well, sometimes there's an element with patients, right, where they might feel embarrassed about some aspect of what they're experiencing, and it's harder for them to say that to another human, because even a doctor, right, even as a physician, like you know that sometimes your patients don't share all the information. Mm-hmm. Do you think, because this is where like people have these very close relationships with their chat GPTs or their AI at this point, where sometimes I think they share more and are more honest, right? It's like similar to a therapist. There's been, plenty of conversations about that in the news, where people like use their chat GPT as a therapist, but maybe they're actually being a little more honest with those systems, where, again, I don't think that the AI necessarily can translate that in the nuanced way that it needs to, but it can gather information in a more useful way, sort of in a positive way, and that you might be able to get more from someone answering AI prompts than you would yourself.
Totally agree. I mean, I think it's a brilliant comment, Ramona, based on the fact that if we can gather more factual information and patients can open up, because you're right, sometimes they're embarrassed to tell the clinician different things about their story, about their past medical history, maybe their history of present illness. And that's our family history. That's some of the information that we really have to get to, or potential drug use, right? I think as we go through those questionnaires on that first visit, you're right. Maybe AI could have something where they'd be much more honest and open through the AI system rather than that first encounter with the physician. Because really what we're doing is we're just trying to be investigators, trying to figure out exactly what's going on as we're forming the differential diagnosis in our minds as we try to listen to the patient. And it's great. Yeah, you make a good point on AI. Maybe it would allow more open communication for the patient. And then the physician,
we got to think the positive and the negative
to create an accurate diagnosis.
Right.
You're right. Just I think based on them being a little bit more embarrassed talking about their signs and symptoms. And that's what our job as clinicians is, to build that trust so they open up a little bit more. But great point.
Well, I will say, I mean, I'm going to share a funny personal story. I think it's funny anyways. I actually shared the story with my therapist and she thought it was hilarious. We talked about Duolingo last time we were on the podcast together. And I was saying how, I'm on it a lot. I use it when I go for dog walks. I'm on it. And part of Duolingo is you have these like AI conversations, right? It's a great way for you to get practice of having a conversation. You're talking to the AI. And I was just having a really, really like tough week. And so in one of these practice conversations, like I was basically like bawling my eyes out in Spanish, telling my AI like all of the tough stuff that had happened to me that week. And I was like, hey, this is great practice for me. I'm able to communicate it in Spanish. Awesome. But those conversations, because again, the AI isn't actually an empathetic sentient being. After the 3 minutes that is the allotted time for each of these conversations, it very abruptly was like, okay, I have to go now. Thanks. Good job talking in Spanish. Like, and it just cuts you off. And you're like, oh, okay.
Lily's like, whoa.
Yeah, Lily, like up to that point, for the 3 minutes, she was like, wow, that sounds really hard. And then she was like, okay, I have to go now, and just cut it off. And so at that moment where I like stopped and I was like, wow, I literally just like poured my heart out to AI, and I was like, that's nice. Have a great night.
Yeah.
So,
but in some aspects of healthcare, that can really help, especially we saw around COVID, a lot of things in addiction science, telemedicine, where people had to really kind of go back to the clinician through telemedicine and those avenues to really connect. And maybe AI could really help that, keep the patient more engaged. We know the more follow-ups they have, the more engagement in some of these support groups, overall better outcomes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
And Ramona, from your story, what would you say is happening to some of those empathy circuits, whether it's in the person sharing or in the person receiving, if more of our conversations are moving over to AI based?
Right. Yeah. I mean, let's tie this back into neuroplasticity. One of the topics from our earlier podcast is it's use it or lose it, right? Just like any skill set, if we are not using those those practices of empathy, et cetera, they're losing their strength. And when we have a conversation with AI, because they don't have their own problems that they're dealing with, because they don't have their own perspective on things, everything that we're putting into it is going to be based, like their response, the AI response is always based on what we share, right? Where if you're having a conversation with a friend, if you're telling them about something that happened to you, they might share something that happened to them, and then you empathize and you have this human connection. I think, and this, I don't know if this is factual, but I would imagine that because AI can't hold that same emotion the way a real human can, if we continue to have our conversations with AI over time, we kind of start to lose the ability to assess someone else's feelings as well.
Absolutely. And I actually have a connection who is developing an emotionally intelligent AI, which I think is interesting. I've just been kind of paying attention to how that works. But I think it's a great point. Like we talk all the time about how society is growing in loneliness. And I think it might have been referenced gently earlier that, some people, because they have such great interactions with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whichever system you prefer, they're turning away from human to human connection and more towards human to AI connection because they're constantly getting that feedback that makes them feel good. And so, it's just as we go, I think it's really interesting to watch how those patterns are built up in the brain and how people respond to one another. And especially like, so I have an example, close friend of mine dealing with some health things. Instead of first going to a doctor, like Dr. Dan goes into ChatGPT and starts typing in all the symptoms and begins making decisions. So we're not just like gathering information at this point, but like starting to make decisions based on what they're seeing off of ChatGPT. And it may be accurate. It might be misdiagnosis, like Dr. Dan said, but the decision-making center, the prefrontal cortex, how we approach making decisions. Laura, would you say that AI is something that's expanding our ability to make decisions, expanding our prefrontal cortex, or just simply bypassing it?
I think it depends on how we're using it. So like, are we using AI? Like we talked about ways that we could use AI as like a thinking partner, like to help us come up with ideas and then we can critically think through it. But if we're just using it to make our decisions for us, then yeah, we're absolutely bypassing the prefrontal cortex. So I think it's less about like what AI is doing to us and like how but more about like how we're choosing to use AI. And we have to use our own brains to choose how we're going to use AI. So it really just depends. Are we like your friend who's just getting all the answer? Not that that's something they would have to critically think through, but like, are they seeking human knowledge or computer? So I think that's where it can get scary. And I think it's up to us. And it's the same thing like Ramona said about neuroplasticity. Like if we're not strengthening the circuits that we use to like be creative and adaptable, then they're going to go away. And then we're going to bypass all of that. So.
Right.
Yeah, and Lori, you make a good point too. I mean, when we look at the prefrontal cortex, right, that's your executive center. So when you look at decision making, planning, emotional regulation, impulse control, I mean, all these things that we deal with every day. And the fact that, Colin, to your point, the importance that the prefrontal cortex has, especially in executive decision making, and how do we improve that not only as adults, but even in our youth or with our kids, right? How do we improve that prefrontal cortex executive decision control, especially with impulses, right? When we talk about, that dopamine, that reward pathway, how do we control a lot of our impulses? Whether it may be addiction sciences, that field, what that looks like, that's really crucial. I think we look at our brain health, Colin, is how do we control that, our impulses?
Absolutely. And Ramona said this, use it or lose it. Laura, you referenced this as well. And with neuroplasticity, we know what fires together, wires together. And so the more repetition, like we've all said, that we're feeding in, whether that is we're feeding repetition that we go to ChatGPT to produce our social media content, or we sit and think about it. Or even something like, for instance, you're shopping with your significant other and they go into the changing room and you sit down and you observe people's behavior. When there is a stop in action, what's the first thing everyone does?
Pulls out their phone.
Exactly, because it's a trained behavior. And so as we think about like our relationship with AI and our own brain and our prefrontal cortex and our ability to make decisions and learn and grow and be creative, it's interesting and it's important to remember the idea that what fires together wires together. But the real question then can become, what cognitive habits are we beginning to rehearse when we use AI? Kind of like we sit down, have a break from something, we immediately pull our phone out. Because repeated digital interaction, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's social media scrolling, and we'll get onto this in an episode about distraction, but it's not that it might be, it is absolutely shaping the way our brains function and the way our brains understand things. So for you guys in each of your fields, what's one way that AI has already changed how you think or how you work or how you create?
Yeah,
For me
I mean,
personally, it really just, oh, go ahead, Ramona. Yep.
no, Dan, you had it. Go for it. I
Hey,
can
ladies
hold.
first.
Okay. I mean, so for me, we've talked a lot about sort of the negative sides of AI, but I am going to say this is a positive thing for me in my own work. Um, I spend more time on evaluation than I do on sort of the legwork to get there. And I say this with a caveat that I think because and everyone on this call has gone through an excessive, perhaps, amount of education where we are very good at critical thinking. We've been trained to critically think. That's like what we do for the large part of our careers. But so for me, having to, what I use AI for, if I have a bunch of information, rather than having to sit down and look at all three pieces and then start to piece it all together, I can sometimes throw it in and it's like, all right, give me a platform, and then I'm going to go in and look at the output and evaluate it critically for quality. I don't think everyone does this, as we talked about the LinkedIn post, but that's what I try to think of it as. Is never it's the first draft. It gets something on paper. It gets something out there that I can then work with and actually like hone into something better. Usually my end product looks very different from the original one that comes out of AI, but it helps me a lot because sometimes the hardest part is just that first step of getting that first draft. So I find that to be a positive for me, is that it gives me more time to evaluate.
Yeah, and just a flip side point. I mean, I think that while AI can maybe accelerate learning, I think maybe an overdependence, right, reduces brain activity compared to independent thought. So we know some of the positive things like early diagnostics, neurotech, monitoring, therapeutic support. But what about cognitive atrophy, mental health risk, cognitive debt, right? The fact that just some of these AI can result in long-term deficits in memory. So maybe just on the flip side, things we haven't really thought about.
Yeah, I would say that, how I would characterize the way that I use AI typically is with an ADHD brain, the cognitive bandwidth capacity and cognitive load capacity is extremely low. My ability or lack of ability, I guess, to get overwhelmed with information is very quick. And I would say probably much quicker than the normal healthy brain would be. So when I think about a thing like cognitive load, which is essentially, if you think about your computer, how many tabs do you have open and how many browsers do you have open? And that's representative of the load that's on the computer. In the same way, if you have a bunch of tabs open in your brain, that's essentially cognitive load. And so for me, I like to use AI tools to help me better sequence events in my day. So if I know I have this, and this, and I have these three projects I need to do, and I have this amount of time, and I want to do my workout at this time, I'll just chuck all of that information into the system, and it'll help me work through outlining a day script that I feel really good about. So instead of having the additional cognitive load or even using up my bandwidth on things like decision making about when I'm going to do something, I like to use the AI tool to just decide based on what I've said I would like to do. And then I feel like I can just go through the day and execute on what I said I wanted to do rather than bleeding out all of the brain energy essentially, or leaving mental residue everywhere.
Colin,
So
I have
you
a
think,
question
Colin,
for
basically,
you.
oh yeah, you would
Yeah.
use
So
this, Colin, as a partner, not a replacement, right? For AI, you'd look at it like a partner, right? Not as
Yeah.
a replacement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so kind of in the same vein though, Colin, with what you just described of feeling like a cognitive overload, AI tends, like, because the way that AI is generally, at least ChatGPTs, things like that, are designed is to be very like they want to give you as much information as possible. Like when you ask ChatGPT a question, does it overwhelm you? Because sometimes those answers are like, I mean, even as you know, whether you're have ADHD or not, like sometimes they start spitting out the answer, and I'm like, this is way more information than I wanted.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I've actually, that's a great question and a great point, because I've had to learn how to change my prompt based on that exact thing. Because you'll ask a question like, what day is it? And you would think it's going to
yeah,
say Monday. And
right.
no, it's going to give you like 8 bullet points and 3 paragraphs, and then it's going to ask you what you'd like it to do next. And it's like, okay, I didn't need to know
Yeah.
that. And so I'll say, like, in very concise terms, or in exact scripting uh, structure, designed this day based on this. And I think that's helped.
So then, do you think that, I mean, we talked about what AI is training us to do in a lot of ways when you're talking about scripting, because I think how we prompt the AI becomes the key, right? That's the output is always based on what we prompt it with. We're all basically writing programming now. Just the way that it's set up is a way that any layman doesn't have to write code.
Yeah.
Because right in programming, it's the same thing. You have code and it has to be very specific, or your code is going to go a way that you never expected it to go. Um, and so I did I did like a small consulting work with learning like basically how to prompt AI, because that was a question I had. Was I was like, hey, if AI is going to be something very that it's kind of unavoidable, we all have to deal with it in our day-to-day life. Like I want to understand like what makes AI work? How does AI think? How do you prompt it to get your outcomes? And so that becomes a skill set that we all have to learn, is like, and it actually maybe in some ways is making us ask more specific questions.
Absolutely. And then also, I would say it can, if you choose to use it this way, it can make you better at what you're already good at. So, and what that sounds really generic, but like if I know that I have a skill set like creative writing, let's use creative writing for example, and I'm not good at data analysis, then I could feed the things that I'm not. In order to make me more efficient, I could say, hey, here's all of this data. Can you just create an outline? And then it creates the outline. And then I can use my skill of creative writing from the outline, from all the data that I poured in, instead of doing the part that I'm not necessarily super efficient at, which is where, Dan, you brought up the idea of using it as a partner instead of as a crutch or something to replace. There are certainly ways where there's opportunity for higher level thinking through this. And Dr. Dan, you brought up brain atrophy. Can you talk a little bit more in brief about what you mean about that and how AI kind of ties into the potential for brain atrophy?
Yes. So even though I think you make a good point, the fact that AI can really accelerate learning, we still have that deficit. So atrophy, sometimes we look at muscle atrophy, right? Kind of shrinking in muscle, and same thing with the brain, right? Even we've seen brain atrophy in Alzheimer's patients. The fact that it's just not able to handle that load, you're shrinking of the brain, you're not being able to process all the information, you're having a little bit of brain atrophy, which I often wonder could be maybe a negative consequence of utilizing some of the AI tools, because we want to be able to build those synaptic connections. And I think that's really important. And maybe it could be very limiting with AI, though there's a lot of positives. There's also, to your point, Colin, maybe some things with the brain atrophy, which is really interesting. And I think that your journey is really fascinating, Colin, with the ADHD, the fact that with task initiation, time management, these things can really help. These AI tools can be incredible for that, especially that time management, which we see a lot with the ADHD kids. How do we manage the time as we're hopping from task to task? So a lot of positives too. I know I talked about some of the negatives of AI, but there's a lot of positives that can be taken from this.
Yeah, task initiation is actually a great point because that is really hard for the ADHD brain. But I would say, just in general, it's pretty difficult for everyone. If we have something that we really are sitting here wanting to do, it can be difficult to know how to start. And that's where an AI tool can be really helpful by just simply saying, how could I start this? Like, I have this huge mess here in front of me. I want to do it. How do I start? I think where things like brain atrophy can start to kick in that is if I stop putting forth the effort to really allow myself to think critically and allow the AI to think critically for me so that it does all of the steps instead of maybe just prompting me to start. And that's a real temptation because think about, I mean, it really, irregardless of what career line you're working in, whether it's corporate where you've just got tons of top down pressure to produce, or you're working in medicine and you need to not just be seeing patients over and over and over again, but you're also producing all the notes and making sure you're diagnosing properly. Um, Working as a PT or a personal trainer, even, you have to script, you have to plan out people's programs. There is an opportunity to use AI to do all of that for you, or there's an opportunity for you to continue to do the work of the mental effort and really challenging your brain and overcoming obstacles and getting uncomfortable in the learning process. I'm curious to kind of shift just a little bit, specifically around the idea of developing these skills, of keeping up with things like pattern recognition, like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, where I go into a new social setting, my brain has to be able to learn how to interact in that setting. What kinds of things, given AI has developed so much and will continue to do so, what kinds of things are we humans still uniquely wired for? And what would you guys say is a trait that's just going to become even more valuable in this AI driven society?
So I think like we've mentioned the term like human connection before. So I think that and like authenticity and like community. So there were actually a few fires in my little town yesterday or Saturday, and two people that are friends of friends lost their houses. And like there's no like where someone went to get her boots and we're gonna have like a fundraiser and that like AI is never gonna do that. And AI is never gonna sympathize. Well, first of all, now they don't have anything, so they can't even get on a computer. But like there's nothing that will replace that community and someone giving you a call and you hearing someone's voice and just being like, it'll I don't know what you say to someone that's just lost everything, but that is something that's just that authenticity and human and community connection will just never go away and will become way more valuable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Laura. And I think we actually see this that with the even with people working remotely, with people using more AI tools, with people just spending more time on their computers in general, that it's now we're kind of seeing a backlash, I think, as we came out of COVID, where people craved the human connection more than they had in a really long time, right? I think when the internet began back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, everyone was so excited about what you could do with it. And we thought, oh, it can connect us in this bigger way, right? It makes it a global community because we can access people. But there's something that's so different about being in person than there is behind a screen. And it's the same thing with AI, right? There's just nothing that can replace it. Like we are wired to have the need for human connection, and AI will never be able to take that place. It just can't.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of it with AI, it's just kind of prompt and accept, right? And I think without having that relationship building, it's a key component. I think with interaction. Sometimes we put things in AI, we prompt it, we accept it to be true, and then we kind of move on. And I think the earlier point about critical thinking, I'm such a big believer because in education, I had gotten my MD and PhD. It was people say, oh my gosh, all these degrees, but it's the fact that it teaches you the ability to think. And I try to tell my kids that the fact that education really comes down to that learning, to be able to think. It's not just the memorization of the math facts and the history facts, but the
Right.
ability to think through and that critical thinking rather than just having this prompting and accepting that we see with AI at times.
Yeah, I agree, Dr. Dan. I think that's actually, oh, sorry, Laura.
No, I just think like you talked a lot about with the upcoming generation, Dan, like that's going to be so much harder because we are all in a generation where we didn't have AI and we had to think for ourselves. But like they're growing up in this where they don't even really know, like, do they even really know how to think for themselves? Like, so it's like, how do you, like, is there going to have to be a course on like teaching people how to use AI? Like, I don't know, maybe that exists already, but like that's crazy. So yeah, I think it's just, what do they even, they don't know anything else. And like we know both worlds, but like the kids don't know both worlds. They only know this world. So it's scary.
I think so when I was in high school, I used to help out with a wood shop, and I remember the wood shop teacher telling me that he was seeing like the years that were coming after mine, he was starting to change the way that he structured his curriculum because he was seeing this already. And this was like, as I said, I mean, we talk about AI because it's become so prominent now, but this has been happening over the last couple of decades, this change in how children learn. And he was like, kids don't understand how to search and find answers anymore, like for themselves, right? We, as we said, we search on Google, we use this. And it's interesting because the educators are always someone that are a slightly different generation or a little bit older. It is a challenge for us as the generation that's coming up as educators to figure out how to teach to children who didn't learn the same way that we did. And I think that that's the challenge for us is like, how do we make sure that these kids still actually learn and learn how to think for themselves? But the way that they process information might be different from how we do. And so we have to like completely rethink education. And I'm a teacher, so I don't have the answer to that, but it does become a really huge challenge. And it's very interesting to think about how technology in general has changed the way children think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. We've seen a
Really?
shift in that, Ramona. I think as far as even some of the high schools, rather than just, you sit down and you memorize all of the, all the information, we're now seeing high schools actually shift to more applicable, opportunities where like, say there's a flight simulator where if someone that wants to be a future pilot could go into high school and say, boy, I'm going to spend an hour here on this simulator rather than just sitting down in this kind of brick and mortar atmosphere and just memorizing information. So I think we're seeing schools be a little bit more creative on opportunities, saying, you know what, maybe my freshman or sophomore in high school, they have a goal of wanting to be a pilot or doing something very engineered, creative. They don't have to be able to just for 8 or 9 hours sit there and memorize at a desk. And there's more opportunities for the kids to then get earlier exposure for maybe what some of their career opportunities would be. I think experience is huge early on rather than just sitting down and just memorizing all these facts all the time.
Dr. Dan, there was a movie made about this, but this is a true story that there was an experiment done in like the F1 world where they took kids who had played a bunch of F1 like video games and actually brought them in, like these were like the ones that were like ranking and the champions in like fake F1 racing, right? Video game F1 racing, and brought them in and actually put them in F1 cars and like put them on the track with like F1 drivers who were experienced drivers. And like it was by no means perfect, but they did much better than anyone would have expected them to do because they had that simulation where there was already those patterns forming, even though like they had never been in an actual car on a road.
Well, you're
It's kind
absolutely
of
right.
it's
Yeah.
super wild.
Yeah, especially now, I've seen some of the best surgeons be incredible at video games. Some of their hobbies are video games, and just the fact that having that tactile feedback, that attention to detail, especially some of the robotic surgeons, it's like playing a video game, right? You have this kind of robotic console away from the patient, with some of these, flexible arms kind of dripping over the patient. The fact that again, that even some of these robotic technologies that are coming out, these surgeons are going home and being incredible gamers, so to speak. But it's that tactile feedback. It's that just pattern recognition, to your point, which maybe we're seeing a lot more medical students, picking up some of these video games, and it's making them better surgeons, especially in that robotic space where they're using their hands quite a bit.
It's an interesting concept. That movie you're talking about, Ramona, I've seen it. And I think for someone who is a surgeon or like a non-competitive pilot, that is a great application. I think for like maybe in real life, I'm not sure if this was based on a true story kind of movie, but those F1 drivers are like super elite athletes. And so someone who is sitting in a chair in their bedroom playing a video game and then going into a car that's going 200, 300 miles an hour, I always found that super interesting. But to what you both said, I think it's super applicable to be able to use stuff like that and learning environments. Like Dr. Dan said, I would have been thriving in that if I didn't have to sit still and learn 8 different subjects. Like I believe Ramona talked about maybe in a previous episode, where we go into school and we sit there and we learn a whole slew of things and are expected to remember and be tested on that. And there's very little application. So that's such an interesting concept. As we close today's episode, I really want to leave the audience with some kind of tiny experiment for the week that they can try as it relates to AI. And really the hope is that they are encouraged to use AI and then reflect really whether it helped expand or reduce or replace their ability to think critically. So just in kind of rapid format, let's just go around and maybe one just applicable thing, starting with Laura, that you guys would maybe take away that would be helpful for someone listening.
Like a new thing or something we've talked about? I mean, I think it's just so hard. I don't think about this daily. Not sweeping up dog hair. I don't know. I guess I think
that's good.
I think to speak what maybe a combination of what Colin and Ramona said is just like maybe organizing your day and like so then it's helping you feed it like these are all the things I have to do and maybe I don't know because I haven't done it so maybe I should do it but like I have all these things to do. The way I do it is I just write it down in my planner and I prioritize, but maybe I and some other people listening should maybe put it into AI and ask them for a better way. I don't know. But I think, yeah, maybe organizing organizing your tasks.
Laura, that's exactly what I do with it. Is I'll put it into the priority that I think it should be, and then sometimes I'll put it in AI and be like, "Is this the most efficient and effective way to get this done?" And a lot of times AI will kind of look at it and be like, "Oh, you could try moving this here or do this first," and then sometimes it's helpful.
I mean, I don't go to sleep till everything's crossed out anyway, so like I'm gonna get it done. Then I'm like, well, am I wasting time by putting it into AI? So maybe I'll experiment with it. Everyone knows.
Yeah, I think that would kind of lean into what my like challenge to people would be, because I think we've talked about this a few times today, is like use AI to summarize something, but then actually look at it and ask if like the way that it is written up and the way that it's written, does it sound like you? Like, does that approach sound like you? Does that sound like an opinion you would have? Because most of the time, what we're putting in and trying to get outputs on is things we're going to share with someone else, right? So make sure that it actually feels authentic, right? Like the output. And if it doesn't, then great, adjust it. But like check your work, check AI's work.
Yeah, and really my goal with AI is to be able to build, especially in the next coming weeks, build that cognitive resilience. I had written a book on resilience. I'm a huge believer of that resilience. And I think building that cognitive resilience, that never quit attitude, always challenging our mind. And that goes a lot with the neuroplasticity concept of kind of the brain's lifelong ability to reorganize and structure some of its functions. So big key takeaway for me is have that cognitive resilience.
Love it. This has been Hello Brain. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Hello Brain, presented by Brainovation Network.